The last engineer. Sarah Chen stared at the holographic diagnostic panel floating before her, its azure glow casting eerie shadows across her face in the dimly lit maintenance tunnel. Something was wrong with the Helios Research Station's power distribution grid. Not a malfunction, but deliberate sabotage. After 15 years of keeping humanity's deep space installations running, she could spot the difference between random failure and intentional tampering. The Alien Research Station had accepted her as their first human engineering specialist 6 months ago, supposedly a gesture of goodwill between species. The Arxins, with their towering crystalline bodies and mathematical precision, had presented themselves as benevolent mentors to humanity's fledgling interstellar civilization. But Sarah had noticed the inconsistencies from day one. Warning: unauthorized access detected in Section Lambda 7. The station's AI announced in its melodious voice. Sarah's fingers froze over the holographic controls. Lambda 7 housed the quantum communications array, her only link to Earth command. She pulled up the security feed on her neural interface, careful to mask her digital footprint using the backdoor she'd coded during her first week aboard. The crystalline forms of 3 Arxine security officers glided through the corridors, their faceted bodies refracting the station's lights into rainbow patterns. They were headed straight for the engineering core, straight for her. "Found something interesting in the logs, Engineer Chen." The voice of Chief Researcher Vix Trix echoed through her comm channel, its usual harmonic tones carrying an edge of malice. "Your species has such a fascinating approach to information security." Sarah's mind raced as she connected the dots. The power grid anomalies, the increased security patrols, the subtle changes in the station's shielding frequency. They weren't preparing for a breakthrough in their supposed cultural exchange program. They were preparing for war. She quickly initiated a full backup of her neural interface, encrypting everything she'd discovered over the past 6 months. The Arxins had underestimated her, assuming human technology was too primitive to notice their preparations. They didn't realize that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology. It was our ability to improvise, to see patterns, to survive. "I'm flattered by the attention, Chief Researcher," Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic panels as she worked. "But if you wanted to discuss my findings, you could have just scheduled a meeting." She could hear the crystalline footsteps getting closer. The Arxins were nothing if not methodical. They would have sealed all conventional escape routes. But Sarah hadn't survived this long by relying on conventional options. "Your species presents a fascinating psychological study," Vex Trix continued. "Such primitive beings, yet capable of surprising intuitive leaps. The data we've gathered from your presence here will be invaluable in the coming transition." Sarah's jaw clenched as she decoded the meaning behind those words. The station wasn't just a research facility, it was a testing ground. Every system she'd repaired, every efficiency improvement she'd implemented, had been carefully monitored. They weren't studying cultural exchange. They were studying human problem-solving methods, looking for weaknesses to exploit. The maintenance tunnel's emergency bulkhead began to cycle closed. Sarah smiled grimly as she executed her prepared contingency program. The station's lights flickered, and for a brief moment, alerts flashed across every display in engineering. "Fascinating indeed," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "But you might want to check your etymology. Engineer comes from the Latin ingenium. It means clever, ingenious." The security feed showed the Arxian officers had reached the outer door. "It also means devising engines of war." She triggered her program. Throughout the station, systems began failing in cascade, not enough to cause catastrophic damage, but enough to keep the Arxins busy. As alerts blared and emergency protocols activated, Sarah slipped into the service shaft. She prepared for exactly this scenario. "You can't escape, Engineer Chen." Vix Trix's voice had lost its melodious quality, becoming sharp and crystalline. "This station is a sealed environment. There is nowhere to hide." Sarah pulled herself through the narrow shaft, her enhanced strength courtesy of growing up in Mars' lower gravity coming in handy. "Who said anything about hiding?" she replied. "I'm just getting started." The shaft led to an intersection of primary power conduits, a position that gave her access to every major system on the station. The Arxins had built this place with typical alien precision, every system perfectly optimized, every contingency accounted for. But they'd never faced human ingenuity before. As she settled into her new position, Sarah began accessing the station's systems through her neural interface. The Arxins thought they were dealing with a primitive maintenance worker. They were about to learn why humans had survived everything Earth had thrown at them for millions of years. "Let me teach you another human word, Chief Researcher," Sarah said as she began rewriting the station's core protocols. "It's called sabotage." The game was on, and Sarah Chen, the last human engineer on an alien station, was playing to win. Breaking point. The Helios Research Station's environmental systems weren't designed to carry sound through its structural members. But Sarah Chen could feel the vibrations of the Arxine security teams through the metal beneath her hands, their crystalline forms resonating at frequencies that human ears couldn't detect. They were methodically searching every compartment, every conduit, every possible hiding place. Too bad they were looking in all the wrong places. Sarah had spent her first month aboard the station mapping its maintenance tunnels and access ways, not because she needed to, but because that's what any good engineer would do. The Arxins had watched her do it, probably noting it as another charming example of human inefficiency. They didn't realize she'd been building her own private network, a shadow infrastructure that existed alongside their pristine systems. Environmental controls failing in Research Pod Delta, the station's AI announced. Atmospheric pressure dropping in sections 12 through 15. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she worked. The Arxians' crystalline bodies were sensitive to pressure changes, not enough to cause serious harm, but more than enough to be extremely uncomfortable. She triggered the pressure drop to clear those sections, forcing the alien crew to relocate exactly where she wanted them. "Quite impressive, Engineer Chen." Vextrix's voice crackled through her neural interface, but ultimately futile. "We have already transmitted our findings to the Arxian High Command. Your actions here change nothing." Sarah's fingers danced across her holographic controls, initiating the next phase of her plan. "You know what I find fascinating about you Arxins," she replied, rerouting power from the station's secondary systems. "For all your technological advancement, you never learn the art of deception. You actually believe you're in control of your communications." A moment of silence followed, and Sarah could almost hear the crystalline grinding of Vextrix's thought processes. When the chief researcher spoke again, there was a new note in its harmonic voice. "Uncertainty. What have you done? Remember all those efficiency improvements I made to your quantum communication array?" Sarah continued working as she spoke, her neural interface allowing her to operate multiple systems simultaneously. "Turns out human, primitive coding has some advantages. You're so focused on mathematical precision, you never consider the possibility of deliberate imperfection." The station's lights flickered as Sarah's programs began taking effect. She'd spent months introducing minor errors into the station's systems, nothing that would trigger alerts, just small inefficiencies that the Arxins' perfect minds would automatically work around. Now she was connecting those imperfections, creating a cascade of carefully controlled chaos. "Security breach in primary research lab," the AI announced. "Containment protocols initiated." "That's not possible." Vextrix's voice had lost its melodic quality entirely. "Those systems are isolated. They cannot be accessed remotely." Sarah laughed as she crawled through another maintenance shaft, her destination already planned. "Isolated by your standards, maybe. But humans, we specialize in connecting things that aren't supposed to be connected." The primary research lab contained the Arxians' most sensitive data, including, Sarah now knew, their analysis of human vulnerabilities. But more importantly, it housed the station's quantum processing core. The Arxins had built redundancies into every system except this one, confident in its theoretical impenetrability. Theory was about to meet human practicality. You should be proud. Actually, Sarah continued, her voice deliberately casual as she worked. Your analysis of human problem-solving was incredibly thorough. You documented every unconventional solution, every creative workaround, every illogical approach we took to solving your tests. You just never considered we might be aware of being tested. Warning klaxons began blaring throughout the station as Sarah's programs reached critical mass. The Arxins had built their systems on perfect mathematical principles, each component optimized for maximum efficiency. But Sarah had introduced just enough chaos into their equations to make the whole system begin to fray at the edges. Station-wide power fluctuation detected, the AI announced, initiating emergency protocols. No. Trix's voice carried genuine alarm now. Override emergency protocols. Authorization. Chief Researcher Primary. Unable to comply, the AI responded. Authorization protocols corrupted. Unable to verify command chain. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she reached her destination. A maintenance node positioned directly beneath the quantum processing core. The Arxins had designed their security systems to prevent any unauthorized access to the core itself, but they hadn't considered that someone might attack it from below. You know what humans are really good at, Chief Researcher? Sarah asked as she began the final phase of her plan. Pattern recognition. We see connections that aren't obvious, like how your perfect systems all share the same fundamental architecture. One flaw, properly exploited, becomes every flaw. The station's lights dimmed as power was redirected according to Sarah's commands. In the darkness, she could almost imagine she heard the crystalline bodies of the Arxin crew vibrating with alarm as their perfectly ordered world began coming apart around them. Last chance. Trix, Sarah announced, her fingers poised over the final command sequence. Release the communications lockdown. Let me contact Earth Command. And allow your primitive species to prepare for the inevitable. Trix's voice was sharp with contempt. You cannot comprehend the scope of what is coming, Engineer Chen. Your species will be preserved, in controlled conditions, studied, improved. It is the most merciful option. Sarah nodded to herself. It was the answer she'd expected, the one she planned for. Then let me teach you one final human concept, she said, executing her command. It's called mutually assured destruction. Throughout the station, chaos began to reign. And in the darkness beneath the quantum core, Sarah Chen smiled as she prepared to show the Arxins exactly why humanity had survived everything the universe had thrown at them so far. Ghost in the machine. Darkness enveloped the Helios research station as Sarah's programs tore through its systems. Emergency lighting cast crimson shadows through the corridors, transforming the crystalline architecture into something out of a nightmare. But Sarah Chen wasn't afraid of the dark. She'd grown up in the maintenance tunnels of Mars' underground cities, where darkness was an old friend. Primary systems failing. The station's AI announced, its once melodious voice now fragmented and distorted, unable to maintain quantum coherence. Core stability at 67% and falling. Sarah's neural interface painted the station's systems in ghostly blue light across her vision. The quantum processing core was fighting her intrusion, its alien architecture reorganizing itself faster than any human computer could process. But Sarah wasn't fighting it. She was guiding it, using its own adaptive algorithms against it. What are you doing to my station? Trix's voice crackled through the emergency channels, its harmonics sharp with rage and something else. Fear. Your station. Sarah replied as she worked, her fingers dancing through holographic command interfaces. I spent 6 months maintaining these systems, improving them, understanding them. The station knows me now. Maybe better than it knows you. That wasn't entirely true. The station's eye was far too sophisticated to be fully compromised. But Sarah had learned something about the Arxins during her time aboard. They couldn't conceive of partial control. In their perfect, crystalline minds, a system was either completely secure or completely compromised. There was no middle ground. She was counting on that blindness. Security teams converging on Maintenance Section Alpha, the AI announced. Unauthorized access detected in neural network substrates. Sarah smiled grimly as she monitored the security team's movements through her neural interface. The Arxins were following their protocols perfectly, responding to each system failure exactly as their training dictated. They never considered that the failures themselves might be the trap. Fascinating approach to chaos theory you have here, Sarah commented as she worked, keeping Vextrix distracted. Your quantum processing core uses crystalline matrices to maintain coherence, just like your body's. Beautiful engineering. Almost perfect. Almost. The word carried harmonics of outrage. Almost, Sarah confirmed, triggering the next phase of her plan. The problem with perfection is it doesn't handle imperfection well. And humans, we're masters of imperfection. Throughout the station, systems began failing in apparently random patterns. But there was nothing random about it. Sarah had spent months studying how the station's AI adapted to failures, learning its patterns, understanding its priorities. Now she was using that knowledge to orchestrate a symphony of controlled chaos. Warning: quantum field containment compromised in Research Lab 7. The AI announced. Emergency protocols initiated. No. Vextrix's voice carried genuine alarm now. Seal off that section immediately. The temporal experiments are about to get very interesting. Sarah finished, her fingers never stopping their dance across the holographic controls. You should have been more careful about letting a human engineer study your containment systems. We have this bad habit of finding connections that aren't supposed to exist. The Arxins have been conducting experiments with temporal mechanics, trying to understand how humans could make intuitive leaps that their perfect logic couldn't predict. They created carefully controlled quantum fields to study causality itself. Now Sarah was about to show them just how unpredictable human intuition could be. You cannot comprehend the forces you are dealing with, Vextrix warned, its voice carrying harmonics of genuine fear. The temporal fields are delicately balanced. Any disruption could create a cascade of temporal anomalies that would render your perfect predictions meaningless. Sarah suggested. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The station shuddered as quantum fields began to interact in ways the Arxins had never intended. Sarah had spent weeks studying their temporal experiments, not to understand the science. Human physics wasn't advanced enough for that, but to understand the patterns. The Arxins used these fields to try to predict the future. She was going to use them to introduce uncertainty into their perfect equations. Station-wide alert, the AI announced, its voice becoming increasingly erratic as quantum fluctuations began affecting its processors. Temporal coherence failing, unable to maintain causality locks. Sarah felt the vibrations through the deck plates as the Arxian security teams tried to respond to multiple crises simultaneously. Their crystalline bodies would be resonating with the quantum fluctuations, making it harder for them to think, to coordinate, to maintain their perfect order. You know what humans are really good at, Vextrix? Sarah asked as she initiated the final phase of her attack on the quantum core. Surviving chaos. It's written into our DNA, coded into our history. Every time Earth tried to kill us, we adapted. Every time we faced extinction, we evolved. We don't just survive chaos. We thrive in it. The station's lights flickered as temporal distortions began rippling through its systems. In the quantum core, crystalline matrices designed for perfect computational harmony began experiencing multiple states simultaneously. The Arxin's perfect predictive models started showing impossible results as causality itself became uncertain. This is your final warning, Sarah announced, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. Release the communications lockdown. Let me contact Earth. or I'll introduce so much uncertainty into your perfect systems that you'll never be able to predict anything again. For a long moment, only the sound of failing systems and emergency alerts filled the communications channel. Then Vix-Trix spoke, its voice carrying harmonics Sarah had never heard before. You would destroy everything. Risked temporal collapse just to send a message. Sarah's fingers hovered over the final command sequence as she prepared to show the Arxians exactly what human determination really meant. No, she replied quietly. I'm going to send a message by proving I could destroy everything, and choosing not to. That's another thing humans are good at, showing mercy, even when it isn't deserved. The station trembled on the edge of chaos as two species philosophies collided. And in the red-lit darkness, Sarah Chen prepared to demonstrate why humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology or our intelligence. It was our ability to do the impossible when we had no other choice. The hunter becomes the hunted. Time itself seemed to shudder aboard the Helios research station as temporal distortions rippled through its quantum matrices. In the crimson glow of emergency lighting, Sarah Chen watched through her neural interface as the Arxian security teams fragmented, their perfect coordination shattered by the uncertainty she'd introduced into their systems. Unable to maintain temporal coherence, the station's AI reported, its voice echoing oddly as it experienced multiple time streams simultaneously. Quantum core experiencing cascade failures across all substrates. Sarah monitored the chaos through her neural interface, carefully maintaining the delicate balance between enough disruption to force the Arxians' hand and total system collapse. She turned their own temporal research against them, creating pockets of uncertainty throughout the station where cause and effect became suggestions rather than laws. Your strategy is unprecedented. Vix-Trix's voice carried new harmonics. Frustration, confusion, and something that might have been respect. Our models never predicted this level of adaptive reasoning from your species. That's your problem right there, Sarah replied, initiating another carefully calculated system failure. You keep trying to predict us. Humans don't work that way. We improvise. Through her neural interface, she watched as another security team entered a corridor only to find themselves walking in circles, trapped in a localized temporal loop. The Arxians' crystalline bodies resonated with the quantum fluctuations, their perfect mathematical minds struggling to process paradoxes that human consciousness handled instinctively. Station security compromised, the AI announced. Unable to maintain cohesive response patterns, security teams experiencing temporal desynchronization. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile as she executed the next phase of her plan. The Arxians had built their entire society on predictability, on perfect cause and effect. Now she was showing them what happened when those certainties broke down. I don't understand. Vix-Trix's voice carried harmonics of genuine confusion. Our analysis showed humans to be primitive, relying on crude trial and error. Yet you manipulate quantum temporal fields with intuition. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day, Sarah explained as she worked, her fingers dancing through holographic command interfaces. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, ice ages. Earth taught us that survival doesn't come from perfect prediction. It comes from perfect adaptation. The station shuddered as another quantum cascade rippled through its systems. In her mind's eye, Sarah watched as the Arxian crew struggled to coordinate their responses. Their crystalline bodies were designed for mathematical precision, but now they were experiencing something they had never evolved to handle: uncertainty. Security containment failing in Research Pod Epsilon, the AI reported, unable to maintain quantum lockdown. Temporal anomalies spreading. What are you? Vix-Trix demanded, its harmonics sharp with frustration. We studied your species for decades. Your technology is primitive. Your science is barely beyond planetary confinement. You should not be capable of this. Sarah laughed as she triggered another cascade of systems failures, hurting the Arxian security teams exactly where she wanted them. You studied our technology, our sciences, our mathematical models. But you never studied our stories. Stories. The word carried harmonics of confusion and dismissal. Stories, Sarah confirmed. Myths, legends, dreams. Humans have been imagining the impossible for as long as we've existed. We didn't develop temporal physics, but we've been telling stories about time travel for centuries. We didn't have quantum science, but our philosophers questioned reality itself thousands of years ago. Through her neural interface, she watched as another security team found themselves trapped in a temporal maze of her creation. The Arxians' perfect coordination was working against them now, each team following exactly the same protocols, making exactly the same mistakes. Warning: critical failure in temporal containment systems, the AI announced. Reality coherence failing in multiple sections. Impossible. Vextrix's voice was barely recognizable now, its perfect harmonics fracturing. The containment systems are perfect. The equations are beautiful, Sarah interrupted. Elegant, perfect, and completely vulnerable to human chaos theory. You built systems that could only work one way. We build systems that can work any way they have to. The station's lights flickered as power redirected through systems that were never meant to connect. Sarah had spent months learning the station's architecture, not to understand it perfectly, but to understand how it could be imperfect. Now she was using that knowledge to turn the entire station into a weapon, not of destruction, but of uncertainty. Your species was supposed to be controllable, Vextrix said, harmonics carrying something close to despair. Predictable. The models showed. The models showed what we wanted them to show, Sarah revealed, triggering another cascade of controlled chaos. Every time your systems tested us, we were testing you back, learning how you think, how you predict, how you control. And now I'm showing you what happens when you try to cage something that evolved to break cages. Through her neural interface, Sarah watched as the last Arxian security team found themselves trapped in a temporal loop of their own making. The hunter had become the hunted, their perfect precision turned into a perfect trap. Final warning, Chief Researcher, Sarah announced, her fingers poised over commands that would push the quantum core past its point of no return. Release the communications lockdown. Let me contact Earth, or I'll introduce so much chaos into your perfect systems that you'll never be able to predict anything again, including your own existence. The station hung in balance, its quantum core pulsing with potential collapse, as Sarah Chen waited to see if the Arxians would learn the hardest lesson humanity had to teach. Sometimes survival means accepting that you can't control everything. Humanity's warning. The Helios research station hung in space like a fractured crystal, its perfect geometry now distorted by temporal anomalies that bent light in impossible ways. Inside, Sarah Chen stood in the quantum core control center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the chaos she had unleashed. The Arxian security teams were trapped in temporal loops of their own making, their crystalline bodies resonating with frequencies that disrupted their perfect mathematical thinking. Core stability at 30%, the AI announced, its voice phasing between multiple temporal states, unable to maintain quantum coherence, station-wide systems approaching critical failure. Through her neural interface, Sarah monitored the delicate balance she had created. The station wasn't just on the edge of chaos. It was dancing with it, experiencing multiple potential realities simultaneously, just like humans had always done in their dreams and stories. You leave us no choice. Vextrix's voice carried harmonics of defeat and something else. Revelation. The communications lockdown has been lifted. You may contact your Earth command. Sarah's fingers flew across the holographic controls, confirming the release, but she didn't immediately send a message. Instead, she initiated a new sequence of commands, one she had prepared for this moment. Actually, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I think it's time for you to send a message to your high command. The station's quantum core pulsed with new patterns as Sarah's programs took effect. She wasn't just lifting the communications blackout. She was transforming the entire station into a quantum beacon, broadcasting on frequencies that would reach every Archean outpost in this sector of space. "What are you doing?" Trix demanded, its harmonics sharp with alarm. "Teaching," Sarah replied as she worked. "Isn't that what this station was supposed to be about? Cultural exchange. Learning from each other. Well, class is in session." Through her neural interface, she began compiling everything she had learned about the Arxens over the past 6 months, their strengths, their weaknesses, their fundamental inability to comprehend human adaptability. But more importantly, she included everything they had learned about humans, seen through her eyes instead of their clinical analysis. Preparing quantum broadcast, the AI announced. "Warning, broadcast power exceeding safe parameters." "Safe parameters are overrated," Sarah muttered as she continued her work. "Sometimes you need to make a little noise to be heard." The station's lights flickered as power redirected to the quantum communications array. Sarah had modified it over months of maintenance work, ostensibly improving its efficiency. Now those modifications were allowing her to turn it into something the Arxens had never imagined, a tool for teaching instead of controlling. "Your species will still be contained," Trix said, but its harmonics carried uncertainty. "The High Command will not abandon their plans merely because one station was compromised." Sarah smiled as she initiated the final broadcast sequence. "You still don't understand. I'm not trying to stop your plans. I'm trying to save your species." The quantum core pulsed with new energy as Sarah's message began transmitting. Through her neural interface, she watched as the data streamed out across space, not just technical specifications and tactical analyses, but stories, human stories, tales of adaptation, of survival, of finding ways to thrive in chaos. "Broadcast commencing," the AI announced. "Warning, quantum resonance patterns exceeding predicted models." "They always do," Sarah replied. "That's kind of the point." Through the station's sensors, she watched as her message rippled across space-time, carrying with it a warning wrapped in an invitation. The Arxens had thought they were studying a primitive species. She was showing them they had been looking through the wrong end of the telescope. "You believe this will change anything?" Trix asked, its harmonics complex with conflicting emotions. "I believe it already has," Sarah responded, initiating the final phase of her plan. "Look at your own readings. Your perfect systems are already adapting to chaos in ways you never programmed. Your quantum core is processing paradoxes that should be impossible. You're evolving, right now, because you had to." The station shuddered as temporal anomalies began to stabilize, not through perfect control, but through perfect adaptation. The Arxen's systems were learning, just as their creators would have to learn. "And that," Sarah continued, her fingers dancing across the final commands, "is humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Not our technology, not our sciences, but our ability to teach others how to embrace chaos, how to adapt, how to survive." Throughout the station, systems began returning to normal, but not the same normal as before. The quantum core hummed with new harmonics, its crystalline matrices now capable of processing uncertainty as easily as certainty. The AI's voice stabilized, but with new undertones that suggested understanding rather than just computation. "Message completed," the AI announced, its voice carrying echoes of its new evolution. "Quantum broadcast successful. Station systems stabilizing under new parameters." Sarah watched through her neural interface as the temporal anomalies resolved themselves, leaving behind a station forever changed. The Arxean security teams emerged from their temporal loops, their crystalline bodies now resonating with frequencies that suggested adaptation rather than just precision. "What happens now?" Trix asked, its harmonics carrying genuine curiosity. Sarah began shutting down her emergency protocols, returning control to the station's regular systems, systems that would never be quite as regular again. Now we do what humans have always done. We adapt. We learn. We grow. Together." The Helios Research Station hung in space, its crystalline architecture now refracting light in new and beautiful ways. And inside, Sarah Chen, the last human engineer on an alien station, prepared to teach the galaxy's most advanced species the most important lesson humanity had learned in its long evolution. The future belongs not to those who can predict it, but to those who can adapt to it. And humanity, we've been adapting since the day we first looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them.